Maris Ashbourne grabbed the edge of the dining table with both hands, her knuckles white. Her body swaying, and stood up in front of 40 people without making a single sound. The chair screamed across the marble. Every conversation died. She took one step toward the door, then her vision went black. She hit the floor before Conrad could reach her, and in the silence that followed, Lady Augusta Belrose looked directly at Maris's stomach, not her face, and said, quietly, "Send for the physician." That look cost Maris everything. If this story speaks to you, subscribe, stay until the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this travels. She hit the marble floor at exactly 8:47 in the evening. She knew the time because the case clock at the end of the dining hall had just finished striking the quarter hour. And the sound of it, 8 clear tones, then a pause. Then the soft click of the mechanism resetting was the last thing she heard before her legs stopped working. One moment she was standing, the next she was on the floor. And 40 people were staring at her, and Conrad Ashbourne was on his knees beside her before the servants had taken a single step. Maris, his voice, controlled directly at her ear. "Look at me," she tried. The chandeliers above her were doing something strange, tilting, multiplying, flooding her vision with fractured candlelight, and her mouth tasted like copper. And somewhere behind her, someone had knocked over a wine glass, because she could hear it rolling across the linen tablecloth in the specific way crystal rolls when it hasn't quite fallen off the edge yet. "Conrad," she managed, "don't move. I'm fine. You are not fine." "Stop talking." She stopped talking. He slid one arm under her shoulders. His other hand pressed flat against her jaw, not romantic, not tender, the way a man checks whether someone is conscious. Clinical, exact. His eyes moved across her face the way she had seen him move across account ledgers. "Reading for problems." "Hargreaves," he said, without raising his voice. "Clear the room." And because Conrad said things exactly once and exactly as if they had already happened, the room began to clear. Lady Augusta Belrose was the last to leave. Maris knew this because she was watching the door from the floor, propped now against Conrad's knee. Breathing carefully, the cold marble pressing through the back of her evening gown, and every other guest filed out quickly. The way people do when they are frightened, and trying not to look frightened. Augusta did not file out quickly. Augusta stood at the far end of the table with her wine glass still in her hand. And she looked at Maris, not at Maris's face, not at Conrad's expression, not at the servants moving around the overturned chair, but at Maris's midsection. That specific look, that specific deliberate measuring look. Then she set down her wine glass and folded her hands and said, "Send for Dr. Pembry." Her voice was perfectly kind, perfectly composed. "Immediately, I should think." She left. And Maris, still on the floor, still breathing through what felt like the entire weight of Yorkshire pressing on her chest, thought she wasn't frightened at all. Dr. Silas Pembry arrived in 40 minutes. Conrad had moved her to the bedchamber by then, carried her, which she had objected to, and which he had ignored completely, and dismissed every servant except Mrs. Aldwell, who served as housekeeper and who stood in the corner with the rigid composure of a woman who had witnessed every variety of aristocratic catastrophe and intended to witness this one without expression. Maris was sitting up in bed when Pembry knocked. She had arranged herself carefully, back straight, hands folded, the same posture she had trained herself into over 6 months of English dinner parties, where being American meant you were already at a deficit and could not afford to appear weak on top of it. Conrad stood at the window with his back to the room. He had not sat down once. Pembry was a compact, careful man with a leather bag that had seen 30 years of difficult news. He asked his questions in a neutral, unhurried tone. Pulse, temperature, the onset of symptoms, whether the dizziness came with warning or without. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "The fainting?" "Tonight was the first time." And Maris paused. 6 weeks. "The fatigue?" "I thought it was the weather." "Yorkshire." She stopped. "From Boston. I assumed the cold." Pembry nodded. He made a note. He asked her to describe the nausea waves or constant. Morning or evening, whether specific smells worsened it. Smells, she said. Almost everything. Coffee in the mornings. The kitchen. Tonight it was the pheasant, he nodded again. Then he set down his pen and looked at her directly and said, Your Grace, when did you last have your monthly course? The room stopped. Maris heard the wind against the window glass. She heard the fire settle in the grate. She heard Conrad at the window go very stiller than he had already been, which she had not thought possible. She did the arithmetic. She did it twice, because the first result could not be right. 2 months. It had been 2 months, she had noticed. In a distant, unexamined way, the way you know-fest something that doesn't fit your understanding of the world, and so you file it somewhere you don't have to look at, she had noticed. And she had thought stress and adjustment, and the body does strange things under strain. And she had not thought, had not allowed herself to think, Your Grace, Pembry said. 2 months, she said. The word was flat factual. She said it the way you say a number you are not yet sure belongs to you. Pembry closed his notebook. He looked at her for a moment, the look of a man who has delivered difficult news enough times to know there is no good sequence for the words. I believe, he said, carefully, that you are with child. The silence that followed was not the silence of joy. It was the silence of a room in which 2 people had just understood, simultaneously, the precise size of what was about to fall on them. Maris did not cry. She had not cried since her father's funeral. And she was not going to cry now, not in front of Pembry. Not with Conrad standing at the window like a man trying to decide whether the floor beneath him was still solid. How far along, she said. 8 weeks, perhaps 10. I would need to confirm. Are largely. Yes, she nodded once. Thank you, Dr. Pembry. He understood the dismissal. He picked up his bag, bowed to her, and crossed to the door. He paused there, one hand on the frame, and looked at Conrad's back. Your Grace, he said quietly, if thank you. Not unkind, not harsh, but absolute. Pembry left. Conrad turned from the window. He crossed the room without hurrying and sat in the chair beside the bed, not on the bed. Not close, the chair, the appropriate formal distance, and looked at her. She looked back. He had the face of a man holding something very heavy very carefully. Trying not to let it show in his hands, Maris, he said. I know what you're thinking, she said. You don't, Conrad. I know what everyone is going to think. And I know, she stopped. Started again. I know what you have been told about yourself for 14 years. And I understand that this, she gestured slightly toward her own bodies. Stop, he said. She stopped. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Hands clasped. He was looking at the floor between them. And the muscle along his jaw was working in the way it worked when he was finding words for something he would have preferred not to put into words. The child is mine, he said. His voice was quiet. Even, each word placed down precisely. She waited. I am telling you that, he said, because I need to say it out loud. To you. First he looked up. Before anyone else says anything else. She studied his face. Do you believe it, she asked. A pause. I believe you, he said. Conrad, her voice did not waver. That is not what I asked. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the trees on the east lawn with a sound like breathing. No, he said finally, it isn't. And there it was, the first fracture. The first honest crack in the careful surface of what they had built together over 6 months. And it was barely visible, barely a hairline, but Maris had grown up watching her father's business accounts, and she knew that hairlines were how everything eventually fell. She had not wanted to marry him. Let the record reflect that. 3 months before the wedding, she was sitting in her Uncle Fletcher's sitting room on Beacon Hill, February. Ice on the windows, the kind of cold that gets into the walls, listening to 4 relatives explain in careful, reasonable, rotating voices why she had no other choice. Her father was dead. The debts were real, the options were zero. Fletcher leaned forward. He's a duke, Maris. He's as wealthy. I don't know him. You will, she looked at her mother. Ruth, thin, exhausted, a woman who had been quietly disappearing for 4 years, and at Clara, 19, sitting with both hands pressed between her knees, trying not to make it worse. Maris looked at her own hands. The ink stain on her right forefinger from 2 months of going through ledgers. Looking for a number that worked. Any number. Any arrangement that could hold what was left of the family together. There wasn't one. She'd checked every column 3 times. All right, she said. She said it to the table. Not to Fletcher. Not to any of them, to herself. All right, then this is what it is. She had expected a villain. You build people in your head on a 6-week Atlantic crossing. Especially people you are about to legally belong to. She had built Conrad from the fragments she'd been given. 41. Widower, English Duke needs a wife, produces no children, and she had built him cold and dismissive and vaguely contemptuous. The kind of man who acquires a wife the way he'd acquire a horse. Functional. Transactional, don't expect more. He met her at Southampton. Shook her hand. Actually shook it, and she learned later this was so unusual that 2 of his staff had exchanged a look over it. He said, "The journey must have been exhausting. We'll go directly north. No performance. No ceremony." He handed her into the carriage and spoke to his man Hargreaves about the road conditions. And Maris sat across from him and quietly revised everything she had prepared. Somewhere near Sheffield, without preamble, he turned from the window and said, "I want to be clear about what I'm expecting." She folded her hands. "All right, I need a duchess who can manage a household and appear in public without causing embarrassment." He said it the way you'd recite a property boundary precise. "Unemotional, informational. I do not need devotion. I do not need performance. I am not interested in a marriage that is a theatrical production." "Agreed," she said. In the private sense, he stopped, seemed to choose the next words with unusual care. "The arrangement is yours to define. I will not make demands that weren't part of what you agreed to." She stared at him. "That's unexpectedly decent," she said. He looked mildly surprised. As if decency had not occurred to him as something worth remarking on. "You came here under duress," he said. "Demanding more than you offered would be dishonest." She kept staring. She had prepared for a villain. She had not prepared for this. The honesty broke her defenses faster than cruelty would have. Not his face, though. He was striking in a severe, angular way, dark hair silvering at the temples, eyes that held more history than they showed. Not the house, though Ashbourne Hall was the kind of place that made Boston feel like a sketch rather than a finished painting. Not the title, which she was fairly certain she would spend the rest of her life not quite believing applied to her. It was the consistency. He corrected her accounting errors without contempt. He answered her questions about estate management, questions that revealed embarrassing ignorance without condescension. When she inadvertently offended Lady Whitmore at a September dinner by asking about her husband's parliamentary voting record, Conrad said in the carriage home, "You were right." She simply didn't expect anyone to notice. She turned to look at him. Was that a compliment? It was an observation. They're not mutually exclusive. He paused. The corner of his mouth moved not quite a smile. The shadow of one, there and gone. She thought about that almost smile for 3 days. By October, she was eating breakfast with him every morning, without either of them deciding to. By November, she had reorganized the household accounts. And he had walked her through the neglected greenhouse at the east end of the property with something she had gradually recognized as enthusiasm, quiet, disciplined enthusiasm, the only kind he seemed to have. By December, she knew he slept better when she was in the room. She'd had a cold and moved to the guest chamber for a week. And by the 4th day, he looked like a man running on less than he needed. She noticed. She said nothing. He noticed that she'd noticed. He said nothing either. That was their language. The things they knew about each other that neither of them said. It was not a love story. She would not have called it that. But it was real. more real than anything she had expected to find on the other side of an Atlantic crossing made under financial duress. And somewhere, in the space between the breakfast table and the greenhouse and the almost smile, she had stopped keeping count of what she had given up and started, quietly and without announcement, to care about what she had. And the mornings went wrong. The nausea arrived first, a low, persistent wrongness that she catalogued as exhaustion. Anxiety, the particular misery of Yorkshire winters for a woman raised in Massachusetts. The coffee smelled strange. The kitchen was intolerable by 9 in the morning. She fell asleep over a letter to Clara and woke an hour later with no memory of having closed her eyes. She told herself every reasonable thing: stress, adjustment. Cold climate, large house, new country. She did not tell herself the one unreasonable thing that turned out to be true. Because who would? She had married a man whom the entire county had quietly, collectively, compassionately agreed was incapable. You don't suspect the impossible. You exhaust every possible explanation first. She had been exhausting them for 6 weeks, 2 days after Pembrey's visit. Conrad came to the morning room and closed the door. He stood against it for a moment, then crossed to the chair across from hers, sat down, leaned forward the way he did when he had decided honesty was regardless of cost. I spoke to Pembrey again, he said. The conclusion that he stopped. The conclusion that was drawn about my condition. It was never based on a formal examination. She went still. 11 years, he said. 2 physicians. Neither of them made a clinical determination. They observed that Adeline had not carried a child. And the assumption, his jaw tightened. The assumption followed. And I had heard it long enough by the time I understood it was an assumption that arguing against it seemed. He stopped again. Futile, you believed it, she said. Yes, because they said it long enough. He looked at his hands. Yes, she thought about that for a moment, Conrad, she said. He looked up. The child is yours, he held her gaze. A long time, long enough that the fire settled twice in the grate. I know, he said, do you? The pause for his answer was exactly 1 beat too long. I'm trying to, he said, and she understood fully. For the first time, what it cost him to say that. Not the admission of doubt, the admission that he was fighting the doubt. That he could see it in himself, and he was not giving it to her. Not laying it at her feet, not letting it become her problem. He was carrying it quietly, the way she carried things. Oh, she thought, there it is. Lady Augusta Belrose arrived on Tuesday with hothouse roses pale pink. Absolutely perfect, their sweetness hitting Maris from across the entrance hall like something calculated. Augusta sat across from her in the morning room, held both of Maris's hands in hers, and looked at her with an expression of such deep, composed, unwavering compassion that Maris felt her stomach tighten for reasons that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. My dear, Augusta said, whatever happens, you must know that women are stronger than people believe. We survive things that would destroy a man. That's kind of you, Maris said. The county can be unforgiving. Augusta's eyes were warm and very still. But there are those of us who understand that circumstances can be complicated. Particularly for someone in your position. A young wife, a small, gentle pause, new to England. One can only imagine how overwhelming everything must feel. She squeezed Maris's hands. No one who truly understands, Augusta said, would judge you harshly. Maris looked at her. She understood every word Augusta had not said. I know the child is not Conrad's. I am not saying so because I am well bred and we do not say such things directly. But I want you to know I know. My sympathy is the agreement between us. Accept my kindness and we can all pretend, refuse it. And see what I do with what I know. Thank you, Maris said. For the roses, Augustus left. Maris sat alone in the morning room. She was 22 years old, 5,000 miles from home. Carrying a child in a marriage the county had already silently decided was fraudulent. She picked up her teacup. Her hand was shaking, not slightly. Visibly, the tea moved in the cup like something trying to escape. She set it down. She pressed both hands flat on the table. And she felt it, the full, unfiltered terror of it, not the composed awareness she'd been performing for 6 months. Not the careful management, just the raw animal fear of a woman who understood that she was standing in an open field, and the arrows had not started flying yet, and there was nowhere to run. This is going to get very bad, she thought. Her hands were still shaking. And I don't know if I can do this. She sat with that for a long time. Then she took one breath, another, and she said out loud, to no one, to the pink roses and the cold tea and the gray Yorkshire morning pressing against the glass, you don't get to decide who I am. Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't care. She said it again anyway. She heard them that evening. Coming down the east corridor, 15 feet from the library door. She caught her name through a gap in the paneling, where the door to the small sitting room hadn't fully latched. 2 voices, wives of neighboring landowners, the kind of women who had been attending dinners at Ashbourne Hall since before Maris was born. She stopped walking. Only been married 6 months. Margaret. Well, but Conrad's situation. Everyone has known for years that he simply cannot, so the question becomes obvious. Someone in Boston, perhaps. The shipping families there. You know how those arrangements, or on the crossing. 6 weeks at sea and she's 22, and poor man. He seems genuinely to have no idea, or he does and he's too proud to say. You know how these reserved Englishmen, Maris, stood in the corridor. She was aware of the carpet under her feet, the case clock ticking at the turn of the hall, the footman at the far end standing at parade rest, looking at nothing, hearing everything. She was aware of her own heartbeat not racing. Gone quiet the way her father's face had gone quiet in the last weeks before he died. The particular stillness of something approaching the end of its resources. She turned around. She walked back down the corridor past the portraits, past the clock, past the footman who held himself perfectly rigid, and met her eyes for exactly half a second with an expression that might have been apology. She went up the stairs. She went into the bedroom. She closed the door, and then because she was alone and the door was closed and there was no one to see, she sat down on the floor. Not the bed, the floor, with her back against the door and her knees pulled up and her face in her hands. She didn't cry. She had told herself she wouldn't cry. And that particular promise was the one she intended to keep. But she sat on the floor for a long time, breathing, feeling the full weight of it, not just the whispers tonight, but the years of them, not just the doubt of 2 women in a sitting room, but the systematic, collective, beautifully mannered, completely irrefutable machinery of English social destruction, which required no evidence, no accusation, no raised voice, no single identifiable moment you could point to and say there. That is where it happened, only the quiet accumulation of compassion and concern and pressed hands and canceled invitations until you found yourself, one day, entirely alone inside a story someone else had written about you. She sat with that for a long time. I could leave, she thought. Write to Fletcher. Tell him it didn't work. Go back. She knew what that would look like. She knew that leaving was confession. That her absence would be the proof. That she would spend the rest of her life in the shadow of a story she'd never had a chance to answer. No, she put her hands flat on the floor, pushed herself up, crossed to the window. Outside the east lawn, the dark tree line, the sky pressing down, flat and gray and enormous. She put one hand against the cold glass. You don't get to decide, she thought. Not you, Augusta. Not the 2 women in the sitting room. Not the county. Not anyone who has never asked me a single question. You don't get to decide. Conrad found her standing at the window. He came in without knocking. He had always come in without knocking. And she had stopped minding months ago, and he read the room in the space of 2 seconds the way he always did. And he crossed to stand beside her without asking what was wrong. They stood together at the window for a moment. The Hartley women, she said. He said nothing. How many of them? She asked. Most. She absorbed this. And Benedict? A pause. Something shifted in his expression. He sent a letter this morning. She turned to look at him. He congratulates us, Conrad said. He also mentions, very delicately, that the trustees will require certainty. The word landed between them like something heavy set down on a glass surface. Certainty. He intends to challenge the baby's legitimacy, she said. He intends to make it someone else's idea to challenge it, Conrad said. Which is worse. She turned back to the window. Conrad, yes, are you going to let them do this? He was quiet for a long moment. What would you have me do? She turned to face him fully. I want to know if you're going to stand beside me when it gets worse. Not in front of me. She held his gaze. Beside, he looked at her. Conrad Ashbourne, who had survived 11 years of a quiet marriage, and 3 years of a quieter widowhood, and 14 years of a story about himself that other people had written without his permission, looked at his wife standing at the window of his family's house with her jaw set and her eyes clear and her hands absolutely still, despite everything the evening had required of her. Yes, he said, one word, placed down with complete and total finality. She held his gaze a moment longer. Then she turned back to the window. Then we'd better be ready, she said, because Augusta is only the beginning outside. The Yorkshire night pressed on cold and absolute indifferent to all of them, and somewhere in the house a door opened. And a draft moved through the corridor, and the case clock at the end of the hall struck 9. One note, and Maris Ashbourne, standing at the window of a house that was not yet truly hers, carrying a truth that no one in the county was yet willing to believe, made a decision that would cost her more than she knew how to calculate and made it anyway. The morning after Conrad said, "Sefer," Maris woke up and vomited into the wash basin. Not gently, not the polite, manageable nausea she had been negotiating with for 6 weeks. This was violent and total, and left her on her knees on the cold floor with both hands gripping the porcelain edge and her hair falling out of its braid, and absolutely nothing dignified about any of it. She stayed there for a long time. Then she stood up, rinsed her mouth, pinned her hair back, and went down to breakfast. Conrad was already at the table. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her face, the particular assessment he did, that took approximately 1 second, and missed nothing, and then he looked back at his newspaper without comment. She sat down, poured tea, the eggs. "Benedict is coming Thursday," he said. From behind the paper. "I know, I want you to know before he arrives. I already know what he's coming for." Conrad lowered the paper slightly. Just enough to see her over the top of it, and she picked up her teacup. Her hands were steady this time. "And I intend to be in the room when you speak with him." A pause. "That isn't concerns me," she said. "I will be in the room." He looked at her for a moment. Then raised the paper again. "All right," he said. She drank her tea. Outside, the first real snow of November pressed against the dining room windows. And the house was quiet in that particular Yorkshire way, not peaceful quiet. Occupied quiet. The kind of silence that has things moving inside it. She thought, Thursday, that gives me 2 days. She thought, I need to know more about the First Duchess. She thought, I need to know more about what they actually know versus what they simply believe. She finished her tea and went to find Mrs. Aldwell. Mrs. Aldwell had run Ashbourne Hall for 19 years. She had run it under Conrad's father, through Conrad's first marriage, through Adeline's illness and death, through 3 years of widowhood. And now through whatever this was, she was 63. Small, precise, and possessed of the specific brand of loyalty that comes not from affection, but from long professional respect. She was also, Maris had learned, extraordinarily well informed. She found her in the linen room, counting pillowcases with the focused intensity of a general conducting a troop inspection. "Mrs. Aldwell," Maris said, "I need to ask you something directly." The housekeeper looked up. "Your Grace, what is being said in the village?" A pause. Mrs. Aldwell set down the pillowcase she was holding. "Your Grace, I don't think. I need to know what I'm dealing with," Maris said. "Not the version that's been softened for my benefit. The actual version." Mrs. Aldwell looked at her for a long moment. the kind of look that was deciding something. Then she said, "They're saying the child can't be His Grace's.
Yeah.
And they're saying, some of them, that there was someone in America." Before the marriage, Maris absorbed this without flinching. "Is there a name?" "Not one that's settled. There are several being tried. And the servants here, Mrs." Aldwell's jaw tightened very slightly. "I have made clear that certain conversations are not to occur in this house. But they occur anyway. A beat." "Outside the house." Maris nodded. "What about the physician?" "Is Pembry talking? Dr. Pembry is not a gossip, Mrs." Aldwell said, with a firmness that suggested she had already verified this personally. "And Benedict? Before Thursday, has he been in contact with anyone locally, Mrs.?" Aldwell's expression shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. "He had dinner with Lord Hartley on Monday," she said. Lord Hartley, whose wife had been one of the two voices in the sitting room the previous evening. Maris thought, of course he did. "Thank you," she said. "That's what I needed." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Mrs. Aldwell," she said without turning around. "The previous Duchess." "Adeline. Was she, did she?" She tried to find the right shape for the question. "Was she happy here?" A long pause, Mrs. Aldwell chose her words carefully. "She was a very private woman." "Your Grace, that isn't an answer." "No," Mrs. Aldwell said quietly. "It isn't. Benedict Ashbourne arrived Thursday morning. He was 36, lean, pleasant-faced in the way of men who have spent years perfecting pleasantness as a strategy. He shook Maris's hand warmly, kissed her cheek, called her my dear cousin in a voice of such effortless affection that she felt the back of her neck go cold. "You look wonderful," he told her. "Motherhood agrees with you already." "It's early days," she said. "Still, Conrad must be well." He glanced at Conrad. "Delighted." Conrad said nothing. He gestured toward the study. The three of them sat down, Conrad behind his desk. Maris in the chair to his left, Benedict across, one leg crossed. Entirely at ease. "I'll be direct," Benedict said. "Please," Conrad said. "The trustees are going to ask questions." Benedict spread his hands, a gesture of helpless reasonableness. "I can't control that. The estate succession is a matter of legal record. And given the history of the situation, given what has been generally understood about Conrad's," he paused delicately. "About the medical circumstances, they will want certainty." "Define certainty," Maris said. Benedict looked at her. He hadn't expected her to speak. She could see the small recalibration behind his pleasant eyes. "They may request a formal inquiry into the child's legitimacy," he said. "But documentation, possibly testimony from whom?" she said. "From," he stopped, she said. "Or about me a beat." "About the timeline," Benedict said carefully. "The dates of the marriage." "Of the conception," she said flatly. Maris Conrad began. "No," she kept her eyes on Benedict. "He came to me sick threat and dress it as concern." "I'd prefer we acknowledge that." Benedict's pleasant face shifted very slightly. "I assure you that my only concern is the inheritance," she said. "Which you will lose if this child is a boy and is legitimate." "I understand your concern perfectly." Silence. Benedict looked at Conrad. Conrad looked back at him with an expression of complete, utter stillness. Conrad said, and his voice was quiet and even and somehow worse for it. "You have made your point. I've heard it. You will hear mine now." He leaned forward slightly. "This child is mine. The matter is not open for inquiry. If the trustees require documentation, they will receive documentation. If they require more than that, they will find that I am no longer inclined to be cooperative on the 17 other matters currently before them." He held Benedict's gaze. "Do you understand me?" Benedict was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled again, slightly smaller this time. "Of course," he said. "I only wanted you to be prepared." "We're prepared," Maris said. He left an hour later. Conrad waited until the sound of the carriage had faded completely down the gravel drive. Then he turned to Maris. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. It may have made him more determined?" He was already determined. She stood up. At least now he knows we're not afraid of him. Conrad looked at her. Are you afraid of him? She considered this honestly. I'm afraid of what he represents, she said. A man with a financial reason to destroy us is more dangerous than a woman with a social reason. Augusta works through impressions. Benedict works through law. She picked up her gloves from the desk. So no, I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid of what he might be able to do. Conrad was quiet. That's a distinction worth making, he said finally. Yes, she said, it is. The invitation began to disappear the following week. Not dramatically. Not all at once, just a quiet, gradual thinning the way a tide withdraws. So slowly you don't notice the beach is exposed until you look down and find you're standing on sand. The Hartleys' winter dinner. Not mentioned. The Forsyth charity event. An envelope arrived, addressed to Conrad alone. The county assembly in December. Lady Forsyth had sent a note deeply apologetic. Dreadfully sorry. They had found themselves simply overwhelmed with family visitors this year. Maris kept a list, in the small leather notebook she used for household accounts, behind the page where she tracked the greenhouse expenses. She wrote down every invitation that didn't come, every event she was not included in, every morning call that lasted less than 15 minutes. She kept the list because she had learned, in the 2 months since the pregnancy became known, that she needed evidence, not for anyone else, for herself. Because the machinery of this kind of cruelty was specifically designed to make you feel as if you were imagining it, as if the dropped invitations were coincidence. The shortened calls were simple busyness. The particular warmth in Augusta's voice was genuine care rather than the specific warmth of a woman who has decided what you are and pities you for it. The list kept her sane. Conrad noticed the notebook once, picked it up by accident, looking for a pen, and glanced at the page before she took it back. He said nothing. But that evening he came to find her in the library. And he sat down across from her, and he said, I've spoken to Hargreaves about the Southfield boundary dispute. We may need to go to the county magistrate. She looked up. That's been running for 2 years. Yes, you've never bothered before. I'm bothering now. He held her gaze. The magistrate is also on the county assembly committee. She understood. He was using the one currency he had, the legal weight of his title and his land disputes, and the 17 ongoing trustee matters, to quietly remind certain men that they existed in relationship to him, and that the relationship had terms. It wasn't enough. They both knew it wasn't enough, but it was something. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and went back to his papers. It was the newspaper that broke her composure. Not shattered it. She wouldn't give it that, but cracked it. In the specific way that the smallest things crack what larger assaults fail to, because you're not braced, because you don't see it coming, because you are simply sitting in the morning room with your tea and your toast and your careful management of every public moment. And then the newspaper is folded open on the table, and a single paragraph is sitting there, and your name is in it. Not her full name. The newspaper was too genteel for that. An unexpected blessing has been announced at a certain notable northern estate, a development which has surprised county observers given the well-documented history of the Duke in question. One can only wonder, and one certainly will. She read it twice. Then she set it face down on the table. Conrad came in 3 minutes later. Saw her face, saw the newspaper, and picked it up. She watched him read it. She watched his jaw tighten. She watched the deliberate, practiced effort it took him to set the paper down without slamming it. Which paper? She asked, though she could see the masthead. The County Gazette, he said. Pemberton's. Pemberton is Augusta's nephew, she said. A pause. Yes, Conrad said. She thought, of course he is. She thought, of course she would use him. She thought. They have been coordinating. Augusta and Benedict, and the Hartleys, and probably 6 others I haven't identified yet. This is not coincidence, and it is not organic social disapproval. This is organized, she said. I want to go to church Sunday. Conrad looked at her. Maris, I want to sit in the Ashbourne pew, in the front of the church, where I always sit, and I want every person in that building to look at me. I know what it will do, she said. I know it will provoke them. I know it will be difficult. She looked at him directly. I also know that if I stop appearing in public, it will be taken as guilt. And I will not be taken as guilty of something I did not do. He looked at her for a long moment. Then all right. Sunday they went to church. The church was full. Of course it was full. Word traveled in Yorkshire the way cold did through every gap, along every surface, finding you no matter how well you thought you'd sealed the house. They walked in together. Conrad's hand was at the small of her back, not possessive. Not performative, the particular placement of a man who has decided where he stands and is making it legible. They walked to the front pew. They sat down. The organ was playing. People were standing, finding seats, rustling programs. And one by one, as the church filled and settled, Maris felt the awareness of the room orient toward her the way a compass needle moves. Involuntary toward north. She sat straight. She looked at the altar. She did not look at Lady Augusta 3 rows back, who she could feel looking at her the way you feel sun on the back of your neck. She did not look at the Hartley women, who she could hear whispering, actually whispering. In church behind gloved hands, she did not look at the young vicar, whose sermon that morning was on the subject of charity and forgiveness, and who she suspected had been specifically requested to deliver it. She sat straight. She looked at the altar. She breathed. Beside her, Conrad's hand found hers in her lap. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes forward, but his hand closed around hers warm, steady a fact, and stayed there for the entire service. Afterward, in the churchyard, Augusta materialized at her elbow as if summoned. My dear. Both hands, the full performance, how brave of you to come. Maris looked at her. It's church, Augusta, she said pleasantly. Where else would I be on a Sunday? Augusta's smile didn't waver. Of course. I only meant given everything, one wouldn't have blamed you for staying home, Maris said. No, I can't think of a reason I would do that. Augusta pressed her hands warmly. Such spirit, she said, with the tone of someone describing a quality they find both admirable and doomed. She moved on. Conrad appeared at Maris's shoulder. Well handled, he said quietly. She'll redouble, Maris said. Equally quietly. I know, she thought I'd be rattled. I know that too, I wasn't rattled. He looked at her sideways. You're a little rattled. She almost laughed, almost. Don't tell anyone, she said. The letter from Clara arrived the following Tuesday. Maris's younger sister had never been a confident writer. Her letters were usually short and warm and slightly chaotic, the way Clara herself was, but this one was 4 pages. And Maris could tell from the handwriting that she had written it in stages over several days, the ink changing shade slightly between paragraphs. Mother is well. I am well. The allowance from the Duke's solicitor arrived on time, and it is more than enough, and please tell him I said so, because I don't know how to write to a Duke, and I've tried twice and burned both attempts. I heard something from Mrs. Patterson, who heard from her cousin in London. I don't know if it's the same thing you're hearing, or something else. I won't write it, because I don't want to be the person who writes it. But I need you to know that I heard it. Are you all right? Not the version of all right that you tell me when you want me not to worry. The actual version. I love you. I am also furious on your behalf in a way that I cannot fully express in a letter without saying things that would embarrass Mother if she read it. Clara Maris read the letter 3 times. Then she sat down at the writing desk and wrote back. Dear Clara, I am all right. Not the performing version. The actual version. It is hard. It is harder than I expected, and I expected it to be hard. The county has decided what I am, and they are very politely, very thoroughly making sure I know it. But I have Conrad. And I am starting to understand that he is. She stopped. She looked at what she had written. She crossed out the last line. Wrote instead, I am not alone. She folded the letter and sealed it before she could second-guess it. She was coming down the main staircase the next morning when she heard it. Not gossip this time, not whispers behind closed doors. Dr. Pembry in the entrance hall below, speaking to Conrad. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom, hidden by the turn of the banister. She knew she should announce herself. She stayed where she was. Cannot be completely certain without further examination, Pembry was saying. But I want to be honest with you, Your Grace. There is something I should have said before. Say it now, Conrad said. A pause. Some years ago, or rather, when it was generally concluded that you were unlikely to father children. That conclusion was not mine. It was Dr. Mercer's, who treated the first Duchess. I inherited his files when he retired. I have reviewed them recently. And another pause. Longer. There is something missing from those files, Pembry said. Pages, possibly removed, possibly simply lost, but several entries in Mercer's ledger reference treatments he administered to the first Duchess that are not explained by the pages that remain. Silence. What kind of treatments? Conrad said. I don't know, Pembry said. That's the problem. The entries are there, the details aren't. Maris pressed one hand against the banister. You're saying the record is incomplete, Conrad said. I'm saying someone may have wanted it to be. The silence that followed was the longest yet. Then Conrad said very quietly, who had access to Mercer's files when he retired? The files passed through the estate office, Pembry said. Anyone with access to the estate office in that period would have had access to the files. Who had access to the estate office in that period? Your factor. 2 solicitors. And your cousin Benedict, who was managing certain estate affairs during your bereavement period. Maris heard Conrad breathe in. She heard him breathe out. Thank you, Pembry, he said. That will be all. She waited until she heard the front door close. Then she came down the last 3 steps and walked into the entrance hall. Conrad turned when he heard her. He looked at her face and understood immediately. How much did you hear? He said. All of it, she said. He didn't look away. Then you know as much as I do. Benedict had access to Mercer's files, she said. Possibly. Conrad, she crossed to stand in front of him. If Benedict removed pages from those files, if he destroyed evidence that Adeline had been pregnant, that you had fathered children, then he didn't just threaten our baby's legitimacy. She held his gaze. He's been threatening you for years. He let you believe you were broken. He let the whole county believe it. Because if you died without a legitimate heir, he inherited everything. Conrad's face was very still. We don't know that, he said. No, she said. But you know it's possible. A long silence. Yes, he said. I know it's possible. She went looking for Lenora Vale 3 days later. She hadn't planned it. She had known in the abstract that Adeline's younger sister existed. Conrad had mentioned her once. Briefly, in the way he mentioned things he found painful, but she had not sought her out. Had not known quite how to, had told herself it was not her place. But Benedict's name against those missing files had changed her calculation. If Adeline had been pregnant, if Adeline had lost pregnancies that someone had subsequently erased from the record, then Lenora might know. She wrote the letter herself, without telling Conrad. Lenora Vale lived in Durham, 2 hours north, widow. No children. By all accounts a woman who kept to herself by choice rather than circumstance. The letter was brief. Maris did not explain fully. She said only, I am Conrad's wife. I believe we have something to discuss that concerns your sister. I would be grateful if you would come. She sent it with the Morning Post. She didn't tell Conrad. She went back to her household accounts and her shrinking list of invitations and her careful, daily exhausting project of being seen in public without flinching. The worst moment came on a Thursday afternoon. Not the newspaper, not Augusta, not Benedict and his pleasant, loaded smile. A Thursday afternoon in the haberdashery in the village, where Maris had gone with Mrs. Aldwell to look at fabric for the nursery curtains, and which she had done specifically, deliberately, publicly, because she was 22 weeks along now, and she would not hide, and she would not pretend, and 2 women came in behind her. She knew their faces. She did not know their names. She was at the counter when they came in, and they did not see her at first. And she heard one of them say to the other, in a voice pitched exactly at the level of a confidence that is meant to be overheard, "Poor Conrad. You know he's convinced himself, the way devoted men do." It's almost touching, really. Maris set down the fabric swatch she was holding. Mrs. Aldwell went very still beside her. "It won't hold up," the other woman said. "Once the child is born, anyone with eyes will be able to."
"Your Grace, Mrs.
Aldwell's voice, loud and deliberate, making sure everyone in the shop heard. "Which color did you prefer? The cream or the yellow?" The two women turned. They saw Maris. The color left both their faces simultaneously. Maris picked up the cream swatch. She examined it. She set it back down. She turned around. The two women were standing frozen in the doorway. And every other person in the shop had gone completely silent. And Maris was aware of all of them, aware of being looked at. Aware of being the subject, aware of the particular specific humiliation of being discussed as if you were not a person but a narrative device in someone else's story. She said nothing. She looked at the two women for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the counter. "The yellow," she told Mrs. Aldwell. 2 yards did not shake. Inside, everything was shaking. She paid for the fabric. She walked out of the shop. She walked to the carriage. And Mrs. Aldwell walked beside her, and neither of them said a word until they were inside with the door closed. Then Mrs. Aldwell said, in a voice stripped of all professional distance, "You are the bravest woman I have ever worked for." Maris looked at her hands in her lap. "I'm not brave," she said. "I just don't have another option, Mrs. Aldwell said, "Your Grace. In my experience, those are usually the same thing." Conrad was waiting when she got home. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" She told him. Flatly, without embellishment. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm going to speak to the magistrate tomorrow about Pemberton's Gazette. Conrad, not for you," he said. For accuracy. The item that was printed was factually incorrect, and the implication was defamatory. "It will make things worse. It will make them worse," he said. "Not us." She looked at him. "Yes," he said. "Right now, everything that happens feels like it's happening to you. I want to start making some of it happen to them." She was quiet. "What are you going to say to the magistrate?" she asked. "That the Duke of Ashbourne's wife has been publicly defamed by a newspaper owned by his cousin's social associate, and that he would like to discuss the legal implications of that before he decides whether to pursue the matter formally." He paused. "And then I am going to let him decide what to do with that information. You're not actually going to pursue it. No. But the possibility that I might is worth quite a lot." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're better at this than you look," she said. "I've been managing this county for 15 years, he said. "I know how it works." "Then why did you let them say those things about you?" "For 14 years. Why didn't you?" She stopped herself. He was quiet for a moment. "Because it was about me," he said finally. "Not about anyone I needed to protect." The room was very still. She understood exactly what he meant. She so understood what it meant that he had just said it. "Conrad," she said. He looked at her. "I need you to know something," she said. He waited. "When this is over, when the baby is born, and the truth is settled and all of this is behind us, I need you to know that I don't intend to forget who stood beside me while it was happening." She held his gaze. "And I don't intend to forget who didn't." He looked at her for a long time. "Neither do I," he said. Lenorville's reply arrived on a gray December morning, 9 days after Maris sent the letter. It was short. Shorter than Maris had expected. "I have been waiting for someone to ask." "I will come on Friday." Maris read it twice. She folded it carefully. She put it in the household account book, behind the page with the list of missing invitations. Then she went downstairs and sat across from Conrad at the breakfast table and poured her tea and said, "Adeline's sister is come Friday." Conrad looked up from his newspaper. He looked at her steadily for a long moment, Something moved across his face, not quite pain. Not quite relief, the expression of a man who has been carrying a question for 3 years and has just been told that the answer may finally be within reach. "All right," he said. He looked back at his newspaper. His hand, she noticed, was not entirely steady as he turned the page. She noticed. She said nothing. Outside, the December sky pressed low and gray and full of something it hadn't yet decided to release, and in the house that was slowly, carefully, painfully becoming hers, Maris Ashbourne drank her tea and waited for Friday. And somewhere in the county, in drawing rooms and dining rooms and the small, warm, comfortable spaces where respectable people gathered to be kind to one another, the whispers continued. They always continued. But for the first time since October, Maris felt something shift, small and quiet and fragile, like the first change in pressure before weather turns, and she thought, something is coming, something that will change the shape of this. She didn't know yet what it would cost. She was beginning to suspect it would cost more than she'd calculated. But she held her teacup in both hands, and she breathed. And she waited. Lenora Vale arrived on Friday at 10:30 in the morning. And she was nothing like what Maris had imagined. She had built Adeline's younger sister in her head the way she'd built Conrad before Southampton, from fragments. From absence, from the specific shape of what people didn't say when her name came up. She had expected someone soft, grief-worn, the kind of woman who had spent 3 years quietly mourning and had come because she was lonely and wanted connection. Lenora Vale was 38 years old, compact and sharp-eyed, with the posture of a woman who had long ago decided that the world required her to take up her full amount of space, or it would take the space for itself. She walked into the entrance hall, handed her coat to the footman without looking at him, and looked directly at Maris. "You wrote to me," she said. "Not Conrad." "Yes," Maris said. "Why?" "Because what I need to know," Maris said. "I don't think Conrad knows." Lenora looked at her for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly. More like a door opening slightly after being closed a long time. "All right," she said. "Where do you want to do this?" "The library," Maris said. "Away from the staff. Is Conrad joining us?" Maris had thought about this. "If you're willing." Lenora considered it. "He should hear it," she said finally. He should have heard it 3 years ago, but she stopped. Yes, he should be there. Conrad was already in the library when they came in. He had received Maris's note an hour earlier. "Lenora is here. Come to the library at 11, please." And he had come without asking questions, which she was beginning to understand was one of the most important things about him. He stood when Lenora entered. They looked at each other across the library. 3 years since his first wife's funeral. Maris watched both their faces and understood there was a conversation happening in that silence that had nothing to do with her grief and guilt and the specific complicated bond of two people who had loved the same woman differently. "Lenora," she said, not warmly, not coldly, simply his name, placed down like something she had been carrying and was setting on a table. They sat. Maris poured tea that no one touched. "Tell me why you waited so long," Conrad said. Lenora looked at him steadily. "Because Adeline asked me to." The room went very quiet. "She asked you not to tell me," Conrad said. "She asked me not to tell anyone." She was ashamed. Lenora's voice didn't waver. But something behind it did. "You have to understand how it was." Every time she lost one, she told herself the next one would hold. She didn't want pity. She didn't want people treating her differently. "And she didn't want you to." She stopped. Conrad said. "To grieve more than you already were," Lenora said. Conrad was very still. "That I knew of." 4. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. 4. Maris watched Conrad absorb it. She watched the thing that moved across his face, not simple grief. Something more complicated than grief, the expression of a man revising a very large and very old understanding of his own history. "He knew about two," he said very quietly, talking to himself as much as to anyone in the room. She told you about the earliest ones, Lenora said. The later ones she hid better. By the end she exhaled. She was very good at hiding things she didn't want to deal with, Lenora. Maris leaned forward. The pregnancies. Did anyone document them? A physician? Dr. Mercer, Lenora said. He was the family physician at the time. He attended all 4. Mercer kept a ledger, Maris said. Pembry inherited his files when he retired, but some pages are missing. Lenora looked at her sharply. What pages? The ones documenting Adeline's treatments, Maris said. Pembry found the references in the ledger entries that indicate treatments were administered, but the detail pages are gone. Lenora set down her teacup. She set it down too carefully, with the specific deliberateness of someone managing an emotion they have not prepared to manage in company. Someone took them, she said. Possibly, Conrad said. The files passed through the estate office when Mercer retired. Benedict had access to the estate office during my bereavement. The name dropped into the room and sat there. Lenora looked at Conrad. Something crossed her face, not surprise. The specific expression of someone who has suspected something for a long time and has just been handed the shape of the thing they suspected. He was here constantly after Adeline died, she said. Every week. Reorganizing things, he said. Helping manage the estate during your grief. You weren't in good condition. You gave him considerable latitude. I know, Conrad said. He had months of access, Lenora said, to every room. Every filed. My God. Lenora, Conrad said. Think carefully. Is there anything else? Anything Adeline told you? Anything, Mercer said. Anything that documented. Wait, Lenora said. She was looking at something in the middle distance. Working through something. Wait, she said again. She stood up, crossed to the window, stood with her back to both of them. Adeline kept her own records, she said. Maris went very still. She kept a journal, Lenora said. She had kept one since she was a girl. When she was ill near the end, she gave me a box. She said, keep it, don't open it, don't give it to anyone unless she turned around. She said, unless I thought Conrad genuinely needed it. Conrad was on his feet. Where is it? He said. Durham, Lenora said. In my house. In the attic, in a trunk. She looked at him fully. For the first time since she'd arrived, with something that might have been an apology in it. I thought it was better to let it rest. You seemed to be moving forward, and then you remarried, and I thought, she looked at Maris. I thought it was over. I thought nobody needed to know. I need to know, Conrad said. I have spent 14 years believing something about myself that may not be true. My wife is being destroyed by county gossip that depends entirely on that belief. His voice was very controlled and very close to not being controlled. Whatever Adeline left, I need it. Lenora looked at him for a long moment. I'll send for it today, she said. The box arrived from Durham on Monday. It was smaller than Maris had expected, a plain wooden box. Dark with age, the kind that might hold letters or receipts or any of the ordinary paper debris of a life. It sat on Conrad's desk in the study for 2 hours before either of them opened it. They sat across from it. You open it, Conrad said. She looked at him. It was your wife's. I know. He was looking at the box. Not at her. I still want you to open it. She understood. He was afraid of what was inside. Not in the way of a man who expected betrayal, in the way of a man who was afraid he would finally understand something he had been not understanding for a long time. And that the understanding would require him to grieve again from the beginning. She reached across the desk and opened the box. Inside, letters folded, dated in a careful feminine hand. 3 small notebooks, a dried flower, something white. Brittle with age. A physician's receipt stamped with Mercer's name. Dated 11 years earlier. And at the bottom a single page in Adeline's handwriting. Folded separately from the rest, with Conrad's name written on the outside. Maris looked at it. She looked at Conrad. That one, she said. I think you should read alone. He picked it up. He held it for a long moment without unfolding it. Then he looked at her. Stay, She stayed. He unfolded it and read it, and she watched his face, and she did not read over his shoulder, but she watched him, the way the tension in his jaw changed, the way his breathing shifted, the way his eyes moved slowly down the page, and then stopped at the bottom and stayed there for a long time. When he finally set it down, he didn't speak immediately. She waited. She knew, he said. She knew that what everyone believed about me wasn't true. She knew it wasn't a medical fact. It was. He stopped. She wrote that she was sorry she let them say it. That she was ashamed, and she thought if she corrected it, she would have to explain the pregnancies. And she couldn't. He stopped again. She couldn't bear to explain the pregnancies. Maris said nothing. She protected herself, he said. Not with anger, not even with bitterness. With the tired, measured understanding of a man who has grieved long enough to arrive at something like compassion. She was ashamed and frightened, and she protected herself by letting everyone believe it was my failing instead of loss. Shared loss, Conrad, Maris said gently. I'm not angry at her, he said. He looked up. I want to be clear about that, I understand. She was very private, and she was hurting. And she made a decision that I would have made differently, but he set the letter carefully back in the box. I understand. The notebooks, Maris said. The physician's receipt, he looked at them. Yes, he said. He picked up the receipt. His face changed. What is it? He turned it so she could see. It was a receipt for a medical examination dated. Stamped, Mercer's signature at the bottom, and in the line for procedure, confirmed pregnancy, approximately 9 weeks, advised rest and reduced activity. Maris looked at it. That's documentation, she said. That's medical documentation, Conrad said, with Mercer's signature, establishing that Adeline was pregnant, which means he stopped. He set the receipt down. He put both hands flat on the desk and looked at nothing in particular for a long moment. Maris reached across and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. You were never broken, she said. He didn't answer. Conrad. She waited until he looked at her. You were never broken. They made you believe you were, for 14 years. That is, she felt the anger move through her, clean and hot and certain. That is not a small thing. No, he said quietly. It isn't. She found him an hour later in the corridor outside Lenora's room. He had gone to tell Lenora about the receipt, and then Maris had gone back to the morning room. And when she came looking for him 20 minutes later, she found him simply standing in the corridor with his back against the wall and his eyes closed. She stopped when she saw him. He opened his eyes. I keep thinking about the 14 years, he said. Before she could speak. I know. I accepted it, he said. That's the part I keep returning to. I didn't fight it. I didn't demand an examination. I didn't insist on. I simply heard it said enough times. By enough people, with enough sympathy, and he exhaled. I absorbed it. I made it part of how I understood myself. She crossed to stand in front of him. That's what they do, she said. That's exactly what they're trying to do to me right now. Say something often enough, kindly enough, and the person it's being said about starts to believe it's true. She held his gaze. You were 27 years old. You were grieving. They had 14 years to work on you. She paused. I've had 4 months, and I almost stopped. Almost what, he said. She looked at him. The night after Augusta came, she said. With the roses. I sat on the floor of our bedroom and I thought about leaving. Not because I'd done anything wrong, because I was starting to wonder if everyone believing something made it if it made it. She couldn't finish the sentence. If it made it real, he said. Yes. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, we did the same thing to each other. What? They told me I was broken and I believed them. They told you that you were that the child was. He stopped. And part of you for one night started to wonder. She was quiet. Yes, she said finally. Then they did the same thing to both of us, he said. She had said that to him. In the bedroom weeks ago they did the same thing to both of us, and he was saying it back to her now. And hearing it from him was entirely different than saying it herself. She reached up and put her hand flat against his chest. His heart beat under her palm. Solid, real. "We are not what they say we are," she said. "No," he said, "we're not. And the receipt Pembry is coming tomorrow," he said. "I've already sent for him. And Lenora? She's agreed to provide a formal statement." "About what she witnessed, about the pregnancies," he paused. "It won't silence all of them." "No," Maris said. "But it changes the foundation. Right now, everything they're saying rests on the premise that you cannot father children. Once that premise collapses, the accusation has no ground to stand on," he said. "Exactly." He looked at her hand on his chest. "When did you become a strategist?" he said. "I grew up reading my father's account books," she said. "Everything is a ledger. You find where the numbers are wrong, and you correct them. The real one this time. Not the shadow of it." She felt it against her palm and the slight change of tension in his chest. Even before she saw it on his face, Pembry came Tuesday morning. He examined the receipt, the physician's notes in Adeline's journals, and Lenora's written statement with the careful, unhurried attention of a man who understood that what he was holding had significant implications and intended to treat it accordingly. "This is sufficient," he said finally. "As a medical practitioner, I can confirm that this receipt, combined with the journal entries and the supporting notations, constitutes credible documentation of pregnancy, which means the assumption of infertility was never medically supported," Conrad said. "Correct." Pembry looked at him steadily. "Your Grace, I want to say as your physician I should have investigated the original conclusion more rigorously before accepting it. I relied on Mercer's reputation and the prevailing social understanding of the situation. That was a professional failure on my part. You corrected it," Conrad said. "That's what matters. What I can offer now," Pembry said, "is a formal written opinion, as the current physician of record for this family, stating that the available medical evidence does not support the prior assumption, and that there is documented evidence of previous pregnancies attributed to this family." "Do that," Conrad said. He looked at Maris. "Your Grace, I also want to say whatever has been said in this county about you, I want you to know that in my medical opinion, there is no clinical basis for any of those suggestions." Maris looked at him. "Thank you, Dr. Pembry," she said. Lenora, who had been sitting in the corner of the study through all of it, spoke for the first time since Pembry arrived. "It won't be enough," she said. They both looked at her, the receipt, the journals. Pembry's opinion. She was looking at the documents on Conrad's desk. "Some of them will say the journals were fabricated, that the receipt is old and inconclusive, that Pembry's opinion is compromised because he works for Conrad." She looked up. "Some of them will say it because they genuinely believe it. Others will say it because they have reasons for wanting this child to be illegitimate." She paused. "Benedict." "Yes," Conrad said. "He knows about the documents, not yet. When he finds out, he will move," Conrad said. "Fast," Lenora said. They looked at each other. "Then we need to move first," Maris said. Both of them turned to look at her. "The county assembly," she said. "The winter gathering. It's in 3 weeks," Maris Conrad began. "Everyone will be there," she said. "Augusta. The Hartleys. The trustees, Benedict." She looked at Conrad steadily. "And us. You want to present the documents at the assembly," Conrad said. "I want to let Benedict make his move in public," she said. "Where it can be answered in public." Lenora was watching her with an expression that was difficult to read. "He will say something," Maris said. "He can't help himself. He thinks we're contained and frightened and waiting. If we appear at that assembly, if we walk in with those documents in Pembry's possession, and Lenora at our side, he will panic. And panicked men say things they should have kept quiet. And if he doesn't panic," Lenora said, "then we present the documents in a controlled way, and the trustees hear it in public, where they cannot pretend they didn't." Maris kept her voice even. "Either way, we stop letting them do this in private. In sitting rooms, in newspapers, in whispered kindnesses." She looked at Conrad. "We bring it into the open." The room was quiet. It could go wrong, Conrad said. Yes, Maris said. You're 7 months pregnant, yes. If it goes wrong in public, it's already going wrong in private, she said. At least in public, I can answer. Lenora made a sound that might have been a short laugh. I like her, she said to Conrad, for the record. Conrad looked at his wife. She looked back at him, steady, clear, the woman who had come to him from across an ocean under financial duress and had, somewhere between the breakfast table and the greenhouse, and the past 4 months of systematic, polite destruction, become someone he could not imagine the house without. All right, he said. The 3 weeks before the winter assembly were the hardest Maris had yet lived through. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because nothing did, and she had learned by now that the silence before these things was its own kind of violence. The invitations continued to thin. 2 women who had been civil to her through October and November suddenly became unavailable when she called. The Hartley family announced a holiday to Bath that conveniently coincided with every remaining county event. And Benedict called twice. The first call he spoke to Conrad alone. Maris did not push to know what was said. Conrad told her afterward that it had been a reiteration of the trustees' concerns, framed now with slightly more urgency. He knows about Lenora, Conrad said. How? I don't know. He has people. She thought about this. He knows she's here, but he doesn't know what she brought. I believe so. Then he's guessing, she said. He's trying to understand what we have before we use it. The second call. Benedict asked specifically to see Maris, she agreed. She sat across from him in the morning room, the same room where Augusta had brought roses, which had begun to feel like a room built for ambushes, and she poured tea and looked at him pleasantly. I wanted to see how you were keeping, he said. Very well, she said. Thank you for asking. The pregnancy is progressing? Beautifully. He turned his teacup in his hands. I understand Lenora Vale has been visiting. She has, Maris said. She and Conrad have much to discuss. 3 years of grief rather inadequately processed. I'm afraid. It's been good for both of them, Benedict smiled. Of course, that's naturally. She's been very kind, Maris said. She knew Adeline well, as you know. She's shared a great deal about Adeline's time here. Things Conrad wasn't aware of. She kept her voice perfectly warm. Perfectly mild. It's been illuminating. Something flickered behind Benedict's eyes. Very fast. Has it, he said. Enormously, Maris said. Silence. Maris, Benedict said, and for the first time the pleasant surface of his voice developed a slight texture. I want you to understand that I have nothing against you personally. My concern is simply the estate, the succession, the inheritance, she said. The legitimate management of a significant Benedict. She set down her teacup. We've had this conversation. You know where we stand. I know where you stand. She met his eyes directly. What I think you've come here to find out is whether we have something that changes the situation. And I think the fact that you came at all tells me that you suspect we might. His face went very still. I'll see you at the assembly, she said pleasantly. Shall I have Hargreaves show you out? He left. She sat alone in the morning room for a long time afterward. Her hands, she noticed, were trembling, slightly but visibly, the way they had not trembled even in the haberdashery, even in the church, because there was a difference. She was learning between performing steadiness for public consumption and actually feeling it in your body. She could hold herself together in front of Augusta and the Hartley women and the 2 anonymous voices in the haberdashery. She could hold herself together in front of the county and the church and the newspaper. But something about Benedict, the specific financial, calculated nature of what he wanted to do to her child, passed all the management and touched something animal and direct. He wanted to declare her baby illegitimate, not because he believed it. Because it was profitable. She put one hand flat on her stomach. 28 weeks. She could feel the child moving now, had been able to for 6 weeks. The specific interior percussion of a small person who had opinions about things. Right now the baby was quiet, settled low, the particular stillness of a child who is doing exactly what it should be doing at exactly the right moment. "I know," she said quietly, to the baby. To no one and everyone. "I know I'm not going to let him." The night before the assembly, Lenora found her in the library. Maris was reviewing Pembrey's written opinion for the fourth time, not because she hadn't memorized it, but because she needed something to do with her hands at 10 o'clock the night before the thing she had been building toward for 3 weeks. Lenora sat across from her without being invited, which Maris had come to understand was simply how Lenora operated. "Are you frightened?" Lenora asked. "Yes," Maris said. "Good," Lenora said. "You should be. This is frightening. That's not particularly reassuring." "I'm not trying to reassure you," Lenora said. "I'm trying to be honest with you. I find it more useful." She paused. "Adeline used to say the same thing to me, that I was too blunt." "I don't find you too blunt," Maris said. "I know, that's why I trust you." Lenora was quiet for a moment. "She would have liked you, I think. Adeline. She would have found you interesting." Maris looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tomorrow is going to be hard. And I want you to know that you're not just fighting for yourself," Lenora said. "You're fighting for what should have been fought for 3 years ago. When Adeline died and Conrad was left with nothing but a lie that everyone around him chose to preserve." She looked at Maris steadily. "You're fighting for the truth of what happened in this family. And that matters, beyond the baby, beyond the inheritance, beyond the county gossip. The truth of it matters." Maris held her gaze. "Lenora," she said, "why didn't you come sooner? Before I wrote to you. Why did you wait?" Lenora looked at her hands. "Because I wasn't sure anyone was listening," she said. The fire settled in the grate. Somewhere in the house. "A clock struck," Maris said. Lenora nodded once. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." She did not sleep well. She lay beside Conrad in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. And then made herself stop listing them, and then started again involuntarily. And then Conrad said into the dark, "Stop thinking so loud." She turned her head. "You were awake." "I've been awake for an hour." Why didn't say something? "About tomorrow. About the last 14 years, he said. "And what I want to do with the next 14. She was quiet. "What do you want to do with them?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Live in them," he said simply. "Actually live in them. Not manage them. Not contain them." He turned his head toward her in the dark. "With you." She looked at him. "Then let's get through tomorrow," she said. "Yes," he said. She reached over and took his hand in the dark. He held it. They lay there in the quiet of Ashbourne Hall, the house settling around them. The December night pressing at the windows, the baby shifting once and then going still, and neither of them slept for a long time. But neither of them let go either. The morning of the winter assembly. Maris broke a teacup, not dramatically. Simply set it down too hard on the saucer and it cracked clean through a thin, precise line from rim to base, and she stared at it for a moment. And then she set it aside and poured her tea into a different cup and drank it standing up, because sitting felt like something she couldn't afford right now. Conrad watched this from the doorway. "We don't have to go," he said. "We do, Maris Conrad." She turned to face him. "If we don't go tonight, Benedict wins without having to do anything. And I will not hand him that." She finished her tea. "Is Lenora ready?" "She's been ready since 7. And Pembrey, he'll meet us there. He has the documents." She set down the second cup carefully, deliberately, making sure it landed right. "Then let's go," she said. The Forsyth estate was 20 minutes by carriage, and Maris spent most of it watching Conrad's hands. He held his gloves in his lap instead of wearing them, turning them over slowly, the way he did when his mind was working through something he hadn't yet resolved. She had learned this about him over 11 months of marriage: the gloves, the stillness, the way he went quiet when he was closest to something he needed to say. Lenora sat across from them, watching the dark countryside through the window, with the focused calm of a woman conserving herself for something ahead. He'll try to discredit you first, Lenora said, without turning from the window. I know, Maris said. He'll use someone else. Augusta, probably, or one of the Hartley connections. Someone who can raise the question in a way that sounds reasonable and concerned rather than self-interested. And then he steps in to echo the concern, Maris said. As if he's merely agreeing with what others have already noticed. Yes. Lenora turned from the window. Don't let Augusta get between you and the room. If she starts, cut her off politely but immediately. The moment you let her build momentum, she controls the frame, Maris said. Lenora looked at her. You've thought about this. I've done nothing but think about this for 3 weeks. Conrad put his hand over hers. Once. Brief. He didn't say anything. She turned her hand over and held his. The Forsyth ballroom held 200 people. It was the largest gathering of the county season. The event that everyone who mattered attended, and everyone who wanted to matter found reasons to be seen at. Chandelier light, winter greenery, the specific warm noise of 200 people performing ease at each other. They walked in together, Conrad, Maris, Lenora, and the room did not go silent. It was subtler than that. It was the way a current shifts in water. The way attention moves without any single person visibly turning their head. A collective reorientation so practiced it barely registered as anything at all. Maris felt it on her skin. She kept walking. Lady Forsyth greeted them at the door with the professionally warm expression of a hostess who had not expected this particular combination of guests and was recalculating rapidly. Conrad, how lovely, and Maris, you look, and Lenora. What as she composed herself. What a wonderful surprise. Thank you for having us, Maris said pleasantly. They moved into the room. Augusta found her within 4 minutes. Of course she did, my dear. Both hands the full weight of Augusta's compassion. Deployed at close range. I had heard you might not come tonight. I'm so glad you felt well enough. I feel very well, Maris said. Of course you do, you're so resilient. Augusta's eyes moved to Lenora. A flicker of something, surprise, calculation, recalibration. Lenora, I didn't know you were visiting. I've been here a week, Lenora said. Conrad and I had things to discuss. How lovely, Augusta said. With the tone of a woman who found it the opposite of lovely. Maris watched Augusta's eyes move across the three of them, reading the configuration. Understanding that something had changed, trying to determine exactly how much. She saw the moment Augusta decided to withdraw and regroup. I must say hello to Lady Forsyth, Augusta said. But we'll talk later, my dear. That went well, Lenora said quietly. She's going to find Benedict, Maris said. Yes, Lenora said. In about 3 minutes, it was 2. Benedict materialized on the far side of the room with Augusta at his elbow. And Maris watched them from a distance, the brief. Low conversation. Benedict's posture shifting slightly as Augusta told him something. His eyes moving across the room and finding her. He smiled when he found her. She smiled back. Conrad was speaking to the county magistrate 3 feet away, and she knew this was not accidental. That Conrad had identified the magistrate immediately on entering and had positioned himself accordingly. Making sure that man understood, without anything being said directly. That the Duke of Ashbourne was present and engaged and not remotely diminished. The first hour passed the way the first hours of these things always passed, in conversation and movement and the careful navigation of a room in which everyone knew approximately what was going to happen and was waiting for it, without admitting they were waiting for it. 3 people said something warm to Maris about the baby. 2 of them looked at her midsection the same way Augusta had at the dinner in October, that specific measuring assessment. The look that calculated rather than celebrated. The third was a woman she didn't know. Small and gray-haired, who took her hand and said simply, I remember what it was like to be talked about, my dear. Keep your head up, and then moved on before Maris could respond. She held that for the rest of the first hour. It happened just after 9. She saw it beginning from across the room, the small cluster forming around Benedict. The way certain men gravitated toward it, the particular body language of a group that has organized itself around a purpose. Lord Hartley, two of the trustees, a barrister named Cavendish whose connection to Benedict she had not previously identified but now seemed obvious. She crossed to Conrad now, she said quietly. He glanced at the cluster. Something in his expression tightened. Are you certain? He's already started, she said. Look at Hartley's face. Conrad looked. Hartley was speaking with the animation of a man delivering something he'd been holding for a while, some formulation, some framing, some version of the concern that was not technically an accusation. Pembry, Conrad said. She found Pembry with her eyes. He was near the door, as arranged, his leather bag at his feet. His expression carefully neutral. She nodded at him. He straightened. And then Benedict's voice carried across the room, not shouting. Not raised, simply projecting in the way of a man who has decided that private is no longer sufficient. Naturally, one wishes the family every happiness. But one's obligations to the estate, to the succession, to the legitimate management of what is after all a significant public trust. The room shifted. It was very fast and very visible, the way rooms shift when something has been said that everyone has been waiting to hear, said, a kind of collective exhale. An almost physical settling, as if the room had been holding its breath and had finally been given permission to release it. Maris walked toward the cluster. She didn't hurry. She didn't run. She walked the way she had walked into the church on that November Sunday deliberately. With the full weight of herself, and people moved out of her way before she reached them. Not because she demanded it, but because something in her bearing left them no other natural option. Conrad came up on her left, Lenora on her right. Benedict saw them coming. His voice paused. Benedict, Maris said. Her voice was clear and even and carried in the sudden quiet of the room. I believe you were expressing concern about the estate succession. He recovered quickly. He always recovered quickly. Maris, simply, I heard what you were simply, she said. So did everyone else. She looked around the cluster, Hartley. The trustees, Cavendish, several others who had drifted toward the sound of something happening. You've raised a question about this child's legitimacy. In public, in front of witnesses, she looked back at him. So let's answer it in public, in front of witnesses. Benedict's jaw tightened. This isn't the place, you made it the place, she said. What evidence do you have? Silent. Her voice was steady. You have been pursuing this question for 4 months. You have spoken to the trustees, to Lord Hartley, to Mr. Cavendish. You have written letters. You have made 2 visits to this house. She held his gaze. What evidence do you actually possess that this child is not my husband's? He said nothing. The premise, she said. Your entire premise rests on an assumption. That Conrad cannot father children. That is what everyone has believed. That is what you have been relying on. She paused. Dr. Pembry. Pembry came forward. He carried his leather bag and the document folder that had been assembled over the past 2 weeks, Adeline's physician's receipt. Lenora's formal statement, his own written medical opinion. He opened the folder. I am Dr. Silas Pembry, he said. In the voice of a man who has given formal testimony before and knows how to do it. I have served as physician to the Ashbourne family for the past 6 years. In the course of reviewing the medical history of this family, I have found the following. He read the receipt. He read the dates. He read Lenora's statement. He read his own medical opinion. The room was completely silent. Augusta had gone very still on the far edge of the cluster. Her wine glass held at a slight angle that suggested she had forgotten she was holding it. Benedict's face was doing something complicated, cycling through responses, discarding each one, finding nothing that worked in this configuration. These documents, Pembry concluded, established that the prior assumption regarding the Duke of Ashbourne's inability to father children was not medically founded and is directly contradicted by documented evidence of previous pregnancies. There is no clinical basis for questioning the legitimacy of the current Duchess's child. He closed the folder. He stepped back. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Lord Hartley said, and his voice had an unsteady quality it had not had before, "Where did those documents?" "From Adeline's private papers," Lenora said clearly. She stepped forward. "My sister kept records, detailed records. I have the originals. What Dr. Pembry read is verified copies." She looked at Hartley directly. "My sister lost 4 pregnancies in 11 years. She kept it private because she was ashamed and because this county would have made her life unbearable had she not." She paused. "As it has made Maris's life unbearable for the past 4 months. For a lie." Her voice did not shake. "I kept her secret while she was alive because she asked me to. I will not keep it now that it is being used to destroy someone else." Benedict said. "The authenticity of those documents is verifiable," Conrad said. He had not spoken since they walked toward the cluster. He spoke now with the particular quiet authority of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment. By the estate's own archives, by Mercer's own medical records in their unaltered form, by 3 independent witnesses who can attest to Adeline's condition during the relevant periods. He looked at his cousin steadily. "I am aware, Benedict, that you had access to Mercer's files during my bereavement. I am also aware that certain pages of those files are missing. I have not yet decided what to do with that awareness." He paused. "I recommend you consider carefully whether you wish to continue pursuing this question." The room was completely silent. Benedict looked at Conrad. Conrad looked back at him. Benedict said nothing. Maris looked around the room at Augusta, whose expression had shifted from composed concern to something she was working hard to contain, at the trustees, who were exchanging glances with the specific energy of men rapidly revising their positions, at the assembled county, who had come for a winter gathering and found themselves witnesses to something considerably more significant. She said, "Nothing about me changed during the last 10 minutes. Her voice was clear and carried easily. "Only what you know changed." She looked around the room. At all of them. Every face. "I want you to remember that," she said. "Before you congratulate me, before you apologize, before you explain that you never really believed whatever you were about to say you never really believed." She paused. "Remember that 10 minutes ago you were standing in a room where that question was hanging in the air. And most of you were listening without objecting." She looked at Augusta specifically. "Remember what your silence cost." Augusta's face was pale. "Remember it," Maris said, "not because I want you to feel guilty, but because there is a woman in this county right now. There are 10 women going through something like this. Without a physician's receipt, without a sister-in-law who kept letters, without a husband who stood beside them." Her voice was even. "And the machinery that was aimed at me is the same machinery that will be aimed at them. And whether it runs or stops depends entirely on whether the people in rooms like this one decide that it is acceptable." She stopped. The room was completely still. Then the gray-haired woman who had taken her hand earlier, the one who had said, "Keep your head up," began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, one pair of hands in a room of 200 people. Then another. Then several more. Not a dramatic, sweeping vindication. Life was not generally a roar. Life was more often a few people choosing slowly to stand on a different side of something. Maris felt Conrad's hand against the small of her back. The same placement as the church. Here, I'm not moving." She breathed. Benedict left before 10 o'clock. He did not make a scene. He was too careful for scenes. He simply was present, and then he was not. His absence noted by several people, and commented on by none, the particular social disappearance of a man who has understood that a room has turned and intends to recalculate somewhere private before his next move. Augusta stayed. She approached Maris near the end of the evening, the room thinning. Carriages beginning to be called with a different quality to her movement. Less composed. Something underneath the composure that might, if you were reading generously, be called genuine. Maris looked at her. "I want to." Augusta stopped. Started again. "What I said tonight, what I allowed." She stopped again. Her hands were folded very tightly at her waist. I believed what everyone believed. I know, Maris said. That is not. Augusta's voice was quieter than Maris had ever heard it. That is not a defense. I know it isn't. I say simply I want to tell you that I know it isn't. Maris looked at her for a long moment. Augusta, she said, you came to my house with flowers and you held my hands and you told me women survive worse things. And what you meant was that you had already decided what I was and you were giving me the opportunity to accept it gracefully. She kept her voice even. That was not kindness, that was a cage built from sympathy. Augusta's jaw moved. I know, she said quietly. Can you forgive me, Augusta said. Maris looked at her. Eventually, perhaps, she said. But forgiveness and forgetting are different things. I'll do the first when I'm ready. I won't do the second. Augusta nodded once. She moved away. Lenora appeared at Maris's shoulder. Well, she said. Maris agreed. Adeline would have applauded that. The Augusta part or the Benedict part? All of it, Lenora said. She was not, despite what her privacy suggested, a woman who lacked opinions. She simply chose her battles poorly. She was quiet for a moment. You chose yours well. They were halfway home when it started. The carriage had been moving for 10 minutes, the dark countryside rolling past. All three of them quiet with the specific exhaustion that follows high-tension performance, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with the hour and everything to do with the cost of holding yourself together in public for 3 hours. Maris felt it first as pressure, low, insistent, different from the ordinary discomforts of the past several months. She shifted in her seat. What is it? He said. Nothing, she said. I'm fine. 2 minutes later, the pressure became something else. Something sharper. Something that made her inhale quickly and grip the edge of the seat. Conrad's voice changed. What is it? I don't know, she said. Something. She stopped. I think Lenora, Conrad said. Lenora was already leaning forward, her face alert. How far apart? I don't know. That was the first one. It may be nothing, Lenora said. Her voice careful and even. Early contractions happen. But the second one came. Maris pressed both hands flat against her knees. Conrad, she said. Tell the driver to go faster. He was at the window before she finished the sentence. The next 4 hours were the longest of Maris's life. She would not remember them clearly afterward, not in sequence. Not in detail. She would remember fragments, Pembry's voice. Very calm, very direct, telling her to breathe. Conrad's hand in hers. Grip tightening each time she needed it to. Lenora moving through the room with the specific efficiency of a woman who has been present at difficult things before and refuses to be frightened into uselessness. She would remember one moment with complete clarity. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, in the middle of something that felt like it was taking everything she had. She heard Conrad outside the door speaking to Pembry in the corridor. Thinking she couldn't hear, and she heard him say, in a voice stripped of every layer of reserve she had ever known him to maintain, Is she going to be all right? And Pembry, measured and careful as ever. I believe so, Your Grace. She is strong, and Conrad. And the child believed so. And then very quietly, in the voice of a man saying something he had not planned to say. Something that came up from below all the planning. I spent months wondering whether the child was mine. A pause. I would give the whole estate for both of them simply to live. Maris closed her eyes. She held that. She breathed. The daughter arrived at 20 minutes past 3 in the morning. Not smoothly, not easily, with considerable argument from everyone involved, Maris included. But she arrived small and red-faced and furiously vocal about the indignity of the whole procedure, and Pembry placed her in Maris's arms and said, A healthy girl, Your Grace, with the expression of a man who has delivered enough difficult things in this house to fully appreciate a good one. Conrad came in. He stood at the edge of the room. He looked at his wife, and then at the child in her arms, and he didn't move for a long moment. Come here, Maris said. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. She placed the baby in his arms. He held her. He looked at her face, the ancient furious, brand-new face of his daughter, and something happened in his expression that Maris had no adequate word for. Not joy exactly, though it was that. Not relief, though it was that too. Something larger than either of those things. Something that had no proper English name. Specific feeling of a man receiving something he had himself over many years never to expect. His eyes filled. He didn't look up. He kept looking at the baby. "Conrad," Maris said. "Look at me," she said. He looked up. His eyes were wet. He made no effort to hide it. "Disappointed?" she asked. He looked genuinely confused. "About what?" "She's a girl, not a boy." Not the heir everyone was calculating about. Conrad looked at her. He looked back at the baby. "Maris," he said, "I have spent 14 years believing I would never hold this." His voice was very quiet. "Very certain. Do you truly think I intend to complain about the details?" She looked at him. She had held herself together for 11 months, through the dinner and the fainting and Pembrey's diagnosis. Through Augusta and Benedict, and the newspaper and the haberdashery and the church, and every cancelled invitation and every pressed and every carefully worded act of compassionate destruction. Through the assembly and the documents, and 200 people's silence. She held herself together through all of it. She did not hold together now. She cried quietly, with her husband beside her on the bed and her daughter in his arms. And it was not grief, and it was not relief alone, and it was not joy alone, it was all of those things at once. The specific compound feeling of a woman who has fought very hard for a very long time and has finally, in this one small room, been allowed to stop. Conrad put his free arm around her. She pressed her face against his shoulder. They sat that way for a long time. Lenora was waiting in the corridor. When Conrad came out an hour later, she stood up from the chair she'd been sitting in and looked at him. "Healthy," she said. "Both of them," he said. She exhaled. The kind of exhale that carries a long time's weight. "Girl," she said. Something moved across Lenora's face. "Complicated and private and entirely hers." "Good," she said. He looked at her. "Lenora." He stopped. "What you did tonight. What you've done this past week. Bringing the documents. The statement being here, Conrad," she said. "I need to say it." "Then say it," she said. "Don't preface it." He looked at her directly. "Thank you. For coming. For what you told me about Adeline. For being honest, when it would have been easier not to be." He paused. "And I'm sorry that she was alone with it for so long. That I didn't know she needed." "She didn't let you know," Lenora said. "That was her to carry it." "I know," he said. "I'm carrying it a little anyway." Lenora looked at him. "That's reasonable," she said. "Just don't carry it forever." He nodded. She put her hand on his arm, brief, firm, the gesture of a woman who does not dispense comfort easily and means it when she does. "Go back to your wife," she said. He went. "In the morning." Maris named the baby. Conrad sat beside her on the bed. The baby between them, the winter light coming through the window in the particular thin, clear way it does after a long night. Conrad went very still. "Adeline Grace Ashbourne," Maris said. She looked at him. "If you're willing." He looked at her. "Why?" he said. "Quiet. Because she was here first," said simply. "And she deserves to be part of the family story. Not erased from it." She looked at the baby. "And because Lenora should know that her sister is remembered." She paused. "And because I think it's right." Conrad was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. He looked at the baby. "Adeline Grace," he said softly. The baby, apparently indifferent to the significance of her name, blinked at him with the focused intensity of a person taking in a new world. He smiled, not the almost, the full one, slow and real and entirely unguarded. The smile of a man who has stopped managing himself for 30 consecutive seconds. Maris stored it away. That smile, that specific moment. She intended to keep it. Lenora came in to see the baby at noon. She stood beside the bed and looked at the child for a long, unreadable moment, said, "We named her Adeline." Lenora looked up. Her face did something she clearly had not planned for it to do. She pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling briefly, looked back at the baby. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Maris said. Lenora looked at her. "Thank you," she said. It came out slightly unsteady, which from Lenora was the equivalent of anyone else dissolving entirely. "She's part of this house," Maris said. "She should be remembered like it." Lenora reached out and touched the baby's hand one finger. Very carefully, and the baby curled her tiny fingers around it with the automatic trustfulness of the newborn. And Lenora stood very still and let her. "Adeline would have said something cutting about being replaced," Lenora said. "Was she cutting?" Maris asked. "Only when she loved you," Lenora said. Maris looked at her. "Then she and I would have gotten along," she said. Benedict's letter arrived 4 days later. Conrad read it, set it on the desk, and looked at Maris across the breakfast table. "He withdraws his concerns," Conrad said. "Of course he does," Maris said. "He wishes us every happiness. Of course he does. He suggests that perhaps his role in estate management might be reconsidered going forward." "Meaning he wants to keep his position," Maris said. "Yes." She drank her tea. "What are you going to do?" Conrad looked at the letter. "I've already spoken to Hargreaves. Benedict is removed from estate management responsibilities effective immediately. The trustees have been informed." He paused. "I won't pursue the missing files publicly. Not unless he forces my hand. But he will not have authority over anything in this family's interests again. He'll resent it," Maris said. "Yes, he'll say things. He'll say them from a position of considerably reduced influence," Conrad said. "Which is the difference between someone with a grievance and someone with power." She looked at him. "That's enough for you?" He met her eyes. "It will have to be. Destroying him entirely would require a public accusation I cannot prove definitively." And he paused. "And I'm not certain I want the remainder of my life organized around his destruction." She thought about this. "No," she said. "I don't want that either." She looked at her teacup. "I want to focus on her," she said. "On us. On this house and what we build in it." She looked up at him. "That matters more than Benedict." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "Then that's what we do." She stood up. She went to find her daughter. The first letter arrived 6 weeks after Adeline Grace was born. Maris was in the library, feeding the baby in the particular absorbed quiet of early motherhood, when Mrs. Aldwell brought it in on a small silver tray with the expression of a woman uncertain whether to deliver it or intercept it. "It came without a card," Mrs. Aldwell said, "just the letter. Addressed to you specifically, not to His Grace." Maris took it with her free hand. The handwriting was careful and small, the handwriting of someone who had written the same letter many times in their head before committing it to paper. The return address was a village 20 miles east. A name she didn't recognize. She read it. It was 3 pages. A woman, 34 years old, married 7 years. Her husband had died in the autumn, leaving debts and a very young son, and a story her neighbors had decided about her before the funeral was cold. A story about where the debts had come from, about whether the son was truly her husband's, about what kind of woman she really was underneath the respectable surface. The letter did not ask for money. It did not ask for intervention. It asked for almost nothing that Maris could name concretely. It said, near the end, "I read about what happened to you. What you said at the assembly. I do not know if you remember saying it, but I have not been able to stop thinking about it since. You said there are women going through this without someone to stand beside them. I think I am one of those women. I don't know what I'm asking. I think I'm asking if that is something you understand." Maris read it twice. Then she looked at her daughter, who was looking back at her with the focused ancient seriousness of a 6-week-old person who has opinions about everything, and the vocabulary for none of it. "Yes," Maris said quietly. "To the letter to the woman 20 miles east. To the room, I understand." She shifted the baby to her other arm. She picked up her pen. She wrote back that afternoon. She did not tell Conrad about the letter immediately. Not because she was hiding it, she had spent too much of the past year understanding the cost of things left unspoken to be careless with it now, but because she needed to understand it herself first. What it meant that someone had written. What she wanted to do about it. Whether this was a single thing or the beginning of something larger. She thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, Conrad came into the library and found her at the writing desk with 4 letters arranged in front of her, the original. Her draft reply, a second letter that had arrived 2 days after the first from a different woman in a different village. And her draft reply to that one. He stood in the doorway. He looked at the letters. He looked at her. "How many?" he said. "2 so far," she said. "I think there will be more." He came in and sat down across from her and picked up the first letter and read it without asking permission. Because he had never been a man who performed respect at the expense of actual understanding. He read it carefully. He set it down. He picked up the second. He read that one too. He set it down. For a moment. "What are you going to do?" he said. "I'm going to write back," she said. "To both of them. And to whoever else writes. And then?" She looked at him. "I don't know yet. I'm working that out." He was quiet again. Not the uncomfortable quiet, the thinking quiet, the one she had learned to read in the first weeks of their marriage when she thought it was coldness, and had gradually understood was simply the way his mind worked. That he needed silence to arrive at things that mattered. "You can use the East Wing study," he said. "It has better light. And if the letters increase," he paused. "If you need a secretary, we can arrange that." She looked at him. "You're not going to tell me it's too much?" she said. 6 weeks postpartum, a newborn, the county situation still. "I'm not your Uncle Fletcher," he said. "I don't tell you what you can manage." She held his gaze. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just do the thing properly. If you're going to do it." "I always do things properly," she said. "You do most things properly," he said. "You broke a teacup on the morning of the assembly. That was strategic stress management." The corner of his mouth moved. She smiled back. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the letter. By February, there were 11 letters. By March 19, they came from all distances, some from within the county, some from as far as London, one from Edinburgh, forwarded through 3 intermediaries, by a woman who had heard about the assembly from a cousin who had been there. They were not all the same situation. Adultery accusations? Yes, but also inheritance disputes where the widow was being painted as incompetent or immoral to justify removing her from management of her late husband's estate. Accusations of madness deployed against women whose only offense was disagreeing with powerful men. Rumors about children's parentage used as leverage in custody arrangements. The specific elegant machinery of social destruction applied in different configurations to different women in different circumstances. But always recognizably the same machine. Maris read every letter personally. She replied to everyone. Some replies were simply, "I hear you. What you are describing is real. You are not imagining it and you are not alone." Because sometimes that was what the letter was actually asking for, not strategy. Not resources, not connections, just confirmation. Just one other person who would read the words and say, "Yes, I see it. It is exactly what you think it is." Some replies were more practical. She knew solicitors now had met them through Conrad's estate business, and she knew which ones were worth trusting and which ones were not. She knew a physician in Leeds who had written papers on the psychology of social pressure and who was sympathetic to cases involving what he called systematic reputational campaigns. She knew Lenora, who had turned out to have a remarkably unsentimental and effective mind for the mechanics of social damage and how to counter it. Lenora had not gone back to Durham after the baby arrived. This had not been discussed. She had simply remained first for a week, then 2, then a month, then settled into East Wing with the quiet permanence of someone who has recognized that they are needed and has decided to stay. She and Maris worked in the East Wing study 3 mornings a week, going through letters together, drafting responses, identifying which cases needed more than correspondence. Conrad, passing the study one morning and seeing them at work across a desk covered in letters and drafts, and Lenora's precise annotated notes, had said only, "I'll have Hargreaves set up a proper filing system," and had arranged it the following day. The filing system was the moment Maris understood that this was no longer simply something she was doing. It was something they were building. The county's relationship with her shifted slowly. Not dramatically, not with apologies or public reversals or any of the clean, satisfying turnarounds that exist in stories but rarely in actual life. It shifted the way things shift in English society through small adjustments. Through the gradual reappearance of invitations that had stopped coming. Through the way certain women began standing slightly closer to her at county events rather than slightly farther. Through the way conversations no longer stopped when she entered a room, but simply continued with her included in them. She noticed, she kept noticing without commenting. Some people who had been most vocal in their sympathy during the worst months never acknowledged what that sympathy had contained. They simply resumed a normal register with her, as if the previous 12 months had not occurred. She allowed this not because she had forgotten, but because she understood the difference between what she needed from them and what she actually wanted. She didn't need their confession. She needed them to behave differently going forward. And most of them cautiously were beginning to. The Hartleys moved to Bath permanently. This was presented as a lifestyle decision and received as one. Lord Forsyth, whose wife had hosted the assembly, quietly replaced his connection to Benedict's social circle with a connection to Conrad's legal network. This also was not discussed. Augusta was, in some ways, the most interesting case. She had not disappeared, had not retreated to Bath, or reinvented herself as someone who had always been on Maris's side. She came to county events. She was present. She was, Maris noticed, considerably quieter than she had been. The specific warmth, the particular weaponized compassion had receded, replaced by something more ordinary and more honest. A woman in her 50s who had done a thing she could not entirely excuse and was trying to figure out how to continue existing in proximity to the person she had done it to. Maris watched this with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite satisfaction. It was, she thought, closer to recognition. The morning Augusta came to Ashbourne Hall in April alone. Without the pretense of flowers or a social occasion, Maris received her in the morning room and poured tea without ceremony and waited. Augusta sat with her hands folded very tightly. "I want to say something," she said. "And I want to say it plainly." She stopped. "Without the thing I usually do, where I say things that mean other things." "All right," Maris said. "I was deliberate," Augusta said, "in what I did to you. Not all of it was reflexive social behavior. Some of it the visit with the roses. The way I spoke at the assembly, the sum of it was deliberate." She looked at Maris directly. "I knew what I was doing, and I chose to do it, and I want you to know that I know that." Maris held her gaze. This was different. This was not the polished apology she had received in various forms from various people over the past weeks, the ones that were really explanations. Really requests for absolution. Really performances of remorse designed to restore the apologizer's comfort. This was something rawer and more uncomfortable, and considerably more real. "Why?" Maris said. Augusta looked slightly surprised by the question. "Why were you deliberate?" Maris said. "You didn't need to be. The gossip was already there. You could have simply allowed it without adding to it. Why did you choose to add to it?" Augusta was quiet for a moment. "Because I was afraid," she said. Maris waited. "Adeline was my friend," Augusta said. "My genuine friend for 15 years when she died. I was not well for a time, and when Conrad remarried, so quickly, someone young and American, and..." She stopped. "I think I was angry. Not at you specifically, at the situation. At the ease of it for him." She paused. "And I told myself I was protecting the county's interests and the estate's integrity, and a dozen other things that were true, but not the real reason. The real reason was grief," Maris said. "The real reason was grief handled badly," Augusta said. "Which is its own kind of thing." Maris looked at her. She thought about what it would cost to hold this against Augusta permanently. What it would require, the sustained energy of it. The daily maintenance of keeping someone in the category of unforgiven when they were sitting in front of you, doing something genuinely difficult. She thought about Adeline, who had also handled grief badly, who had protected herself at Conrad's expense, who had made choices that were understandable and flawed and thoroughly human. She thought about herself, on the floor of the bedroom in October. Also understandable, also flawed, also thoroughly human. I accept that. Augusta looked at her. Not as absolution, Maris said. I'm not in a position to give you that. And I don't think you'd trust it if I did. She paused. But I accept that you know what you did, and I accept that what you just told me is true. She held Augusta's gaze. What you do with that going forward is your own work. Not mine. Augusta was quiet for a moment. That's fair, she said. Yes, Maris said, it is. Augusta left an hour later, not with the buoyant relief of a woman who has been forgiven and restored, but with the quieter, more complicated expression of a woman who has been seen accurately and knows that the seeing changes something she will have to live with. Maris sat alone in the morning room. She thought that was the right thing. Not the satisfying thing. The right one, she thought. They're not always the same. Then she went back to her letters. Clara arrived in May. She came from Boston with their mother Ruth, who was thinner than when Maris had last seen her but steadier. Buoyed by the Yorkshire air and the obvious evidence that her eldest daughter was not merely surviving, but had built something genuinely solid. Ruth spent her first week walking the gardens and exclaiming at the greenhouse and being gently managed by Mrs. Aldwell, who recognized her type immediately and received her with a warmth she reserved for people she respected. Clara was 23 now and no longer trying not to cry. She sat across from Maris on the second evening, after dinner. After Conrad had tactfully taken Ruth to the library to discuss Boston literary history. And she looked at her sister across the fireplace and said, I need you to tell me everything, the real version. Not the version you put in the letters. Maris looked at her. That will take a long time, she said. I know, Clara said. Start at the beginning, so Maris told her. Everything. The dinner and the fainting and Pembry's diagnosis. Augusta and the roses. The corridor and the two women and the bedroom floor. Benedict's visits and the newspaper and the church and the haberdashery. Lenora and the box and Adeline's letters and the receipt. The assembly and the documents and 200 people's silence. Clara listened without interrupting. When Maris finished, Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, the letter you sent me in December. The one where you crossed something out. Maris looked at her. What about it? I could still read it a little. Through the crossing. Clara met her eyes. You wrote that you had Conrad. And then you were going to write something else and you crossed it out and wrote, I am not alone instead. Maris was quiet. What were you going to write? Clara said, a long pause. I was going to write that I was starting to understand that he was. Maris stopped. That he was someone worth staying for. She looked at her hands. Not just someone to stay because leaving would look like guilt. Actually worth staying for. Clara looked at her. That's different from what you expected, she said. Yes, Maris said, considerably. Are you happy? Maris considered this honestly. I am. She searched for the right word. I am real, she said finally. More real than I've ever been. I know who I am more clearly than I did before all of this. And I know who he is, and I know what we have, which is she paused. Which is not perfect and not easy and not what I would have designed if given the choice. But it is true. Every part of it is true. Clara looked at her for a long moment. That's better than happy, Clara said. Yes, Maris said. I think it is. The twist came in June. Maris was in the East Wing study with Lenora when Mrs. Aldwell brought in a letter with a London postmark and a solicitor's seal, not one of the solicitors she knew. One she didn't recognize. She opened it, she read it. She read it again. Lenora, she said. Lenora looked up from the letter she was annotating. Maris handed it across the desk. Lenora read it. Her expression changed. Slowly, precisely, the way Lenora's expressions always changed, controlled and deliberate, and revealing something significant despite the control. Benedict. Yes, Maris said. The letter was from a London solicitor acting on behalf of a woman, a widow, who was pursuing a claim against a named party for a systematic campaign of defamation conducted over the past 3 years. The named party was Benedict Ashbourne. The woman was someone neither of them had heard of, a widow in Northumberland. A woman who had been through something strikingly similar to what Maris had survived. At Benedict's deliberate instigation, for reasons that the letter began to make clear. Benedict had pursued this woman, a landowner in her own right. A widow with no male heir, with the intention of destabilizing her reputation sufficiently that her estate's management could be legally challenged and her land acquired at a fraction of its value. He had used the same methodology he'd attempted with Maris' social gossip. Strategic compassion, the careful deployment of concerned sympathy, but with a woman who had no Conrad, no Lenora, no Pembry and his documents. She had lost most of her estate before she found a solicitor willing to take her case. Now she had found one, and the solicitor had found, in researching the case, a pattern. Benedict's name connected to 3 separate situations over the past 6 years, 3 women, 3 estates, 3 campaigns of reputational destruction deployed with the specific, calculated intent of acquiring property. The solicitor was writing to Maris because her name was in the public record connected to Benedict's attempt at Ashbourne. And because what had happened at the Winter Assembly had apparently reached even London. And because this woman and her solicitor were looking for anyone who had direct experience of Benedict's methods. Maris set down the letter. She thought about what Conrad had said. I'm not certain I want the remainder of my life organized around his destruction. She thought about what she had said that matters more than Benedict. She thought about 3 women, 3 estates, and however many she didn't know about. She picked up her pen. She wrote to the solicitor that afternoon. She also walked to Conrad's study and knocked and opened the door and handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. The muscle in his jaw moved. He set it down. He looked at her. This changes the calculation, she said. Yes, he said. This isn't about our family anymore. This is a pattern. She held his gaze. This is what he does. We just happened to be the case where it didn't work. Yes, Conrad said. Which means if we let it rest, he does it again, Conrad said. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. I'll speak to our solicitor this afternoon, he said. I've already written to the London solicitor, she said. He looked at her. How long have you been standing outside my door, he said. 3 minutes, she said. I wrote the letter first. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up and crossed the room and kissed her forehead unhurried. Deliberate, the gesture of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not expect to arrive and finds it considerably better than anywhere he was before. Go back to your letters, he said. I have 17 to get through today, she said. Then go, he said. I have a solicitor to call. She went. The legal case against Benedict took 14 months. It was not dramatic in the way of courtroom dramas. It was slow and expensive and procedural, and involved a quantity of paperwork that Maris found both exhausting and, in some strange way, satisfying the satisfaction of a woman who had spent a year being targeted by a man who operated in shadows. Watching those shadows get methodically documented and exposed to light. Benedict did not go to prison. The law in 1887 was not constructed to readily imprison a gentleman for what could be framed as aggressive business practices. But he was publicly named in 3 separate legal actions. His reputation, the pleasant, warm, carefully maintained reputation that was his primary instrument, was comprehensively and permanently damaged. He lost his position with 2 county committees. Several men who had been his allies in the matter of Ashbourne's succession quietly ceased to be his allies. He sold his own estate in Derbyshire 2 years later and moved abroad. Conrad did not celebrate this. Maris did not either. What she felt when she heard was closer to tired relief, the feeling of putting down something heavy that you have been carrying for a long time, and finding that your hands are simply empty now. Not triumphant, just is it enough? Conrad asked her. The evening they heard Benedict had gone. She thought about it. For us, yes, she said. For the 3 women, for the widow in Northumberland, I don't know. She got her solicitor and her legal process and some portion of what was taken from her. But you can't fully restore what that kind of damage takes. She paused. Nobody gave me back the invitations. Nobody gave me back the months I spent thinking about leaving. Nobody, she stopped. Nobody gave you back the floor of the bedroom, he said quietly. She looked at him. No, she said, that stays. He reached across and took her hand. But you didn't leave, he said. I didn't. That also stays, he said. She looked at his hand over hers. Yes, she said. That also stays. Adeline Grace Ashbourne took her first steps on a Tuesday morning in January. 14 months after her birth, directly across the library floor, toward the bookshelf she had been studying with focused ambition for 3 weeks. She made it 4 steps before sitting down abruptly with an expression of profound surprise. Lenora, who was in the armchair with a letter she was reviewing, said 4 steps. That's respectable. She'll have 6 by Thursday, Maris said. 5, Conrad said. They looked at him. She paused on step 3, he said. She was reassessing. She'll work on the reassessment before she adds steps, Adeline. Apparently indifferent to being analyzed, pulled herself back up using the bookshelf and stood there gripping it with the concentrated ferocity of a person who has committed to something and intends to see it through. Maris watched her daughter. She thought about it would be to grow up in this house, in this specific house. With its complicated history, and its library full of letters, and its East Wing study, and its housekeeper who had called her the bravest woman she'd ever worked for, and the great aunt who had come for a week and never left, and the father who read account ledgers for pleasure, and noticed things without always saying them. She thought about what it would mean to grow up knowing that the women in her family had stood in rooms full of people who had decided what they were, and had said, clearly and without apology, you are wrong about me. And I will not pretend you are right, she thought. I want her to know that story, when she's old enough. All of it, not as a cautionary tale. Just as the truth of where she came from. 2 years after Adeline Grace's birth, a son arrived, James, for Maris's father and for his own. Came into the world on an April morning with considerably less drama than his sister quickly. Efficiently, with the brisk energy of a person who has somewhere to be and intends to get there. Pembry pronounced him healthy. Lenora said well. There goes Benedict's last argument. Conrad was holding the baby and looked up at her with an expression that suggested he had no interest in thinking about Benedict at this particular moment. Sorry, Lenora said, without sounding very sorry. Maris laughed. Actually laughed, surprised out of it by Lenora's timing. And the laugh was real and full, and the kind and that belongs only to people who have been frightened together and come out the other side of it, and are now. Finally, genuinely in the clear, Conrad looked at her. She looked back. Too, he agreed. The county will have opinions. The county, he said, can manage its own opinions. She smiled. He smiled back. The real one. The last letter of that year arrived in December. It was from a girl, not a woman, a girl, 19 years old. From a village in Lancashire, whose situation was one Maris had not encountered before. Not a widow, not a wife, but a daughter. Accused by her own family of having brought scandal on them by refusing to marry a man she knew to be dangerous. The family had deployed the social machinery against their own child, declaring her unstable, unmanageable, a source of shame, in order to justify to the community why they had removed her from the family home and cut off her funds. The girl had nowhere to go and no one had believed her, and she had heard, through some path she didn't explain, that there was a woman at Ashbourne Hall who would read a letter without having decided the answer first. Maris read the letter. She went to Conrad's study. She knocked and opened the door and stood in the doorway. He looked up. "I need your help," she said. She had not said those words to him in nearly 3 years of marriage. She had asked him questions. She had told him things. She had requested specific things: solicitors, filing systems, the East Wing study, Lenora to stay. But she had not, until this moment, said plainly, "I need your help." He set down his pen. She told him. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "What does she need?" "Somewhere to be," Maris said. "Somewhere safe while she works out her next step. Somewhere that is not her family's house and is not the street. She can come here," he said. Maris looked at him. "As what?" "We can't simply as our guest," he said. "For as long as she needs. We have the rooms." He picked up his pen and looked back at his papers. "Write and tell her to come." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "Conrad." He looked up. "Thank you," she said. "You keep thanking me for things that don't require thanks," he said. "This one does," she said. He held her gaze. "Then you're welcome," he said. The girl arrived the following week. Her name was Harriet, and she was small and frightened and held herself with the specific braced quality of someone who has been disbelieved so many times they have stopped expecting anything different. Maris met her in the entrance hall. Harriet looked around at the house, at Mrs. Aldwell standing in the background, at Lenora coming down the stairs with a letter in her hand with the expression of someone trying to determine what the cost of this would be. Because everything had a cost. She had learned that. "You wrote to me," Harriet said. "Carefully, you didn't have to." "I know," Maris said. "Why did you?" Maris looked at her, at the 19-year-old girl who had gone to the only place she could think of because she had heard that there was a woman here who would not decide the answer before hearing the question. "Because someone should have written to me," Maris said. "And no one did, and I survived it anyway," but she paused. "But it didn't need to be as hard as it was." Harriet looked at her. Something in the braced quality shifted, not much. "A degree. The way a door moves when the latch release is not open yet. Just no longer locked. Come in," Maris said. "Mrs. Aldwell will show you your room. When you're ready, come find me in the East Wing study. There's no schedule. No requirements. Just come when you're ready." Harriet nodded. She came in. That evening, Conrad found Maris in the library. She was at the writing desk with a letter, a new one. Arrived that morning. Another woman, another situation. Another person who had heard somehow that Ashbourne Hall was a place where a letter would be read without judgment. He stood in the doorway and looked at her at the desk, covered in correspondence. At the files Lenora had organized on the shelves. At the woman his county had spent a year trying to break and who had, in the breaking, become something none of them had anticipated. "Can we help her?" he asked. "About the letter. About whichever woman this one was." Maris read to the end of the page. She looked up. "She didn't ask us to help," she said. "Then what did she ask?" Maris folded the letter carefully. "To be believed long enough to finish speaking," she said. Conrad crossed the room and sat down beside her. He didn't speak. He picked up his book. He settled in. She turned back to her letter and began to write. Outside, the December dark pressed against the windows of Ashbourne Hall. And inside the house, Harriet was asleep for the first time in weeks, in a room where no one had decided who she was. And Adeline Grace was asleep with her hand curled under her chin the way she always slept. And James Conrad was asleep with the efficient certainty of a boy who intends to be back at it first thing in the morning. And Lenora was reading in the East Wing with a cup of tea that had gone cold because she had forgotten to drink it. And Mrs. Aldwell was finishing the household accounts with the satisfaction of a woman who keeps good numbers. And the case clock in the corridor was ticking its way through another hour of a house that had learned, slowly and at considerable cost, what it meant to be a place where the truth was both required and safe. And Maris Ashbourne, who had come across an ocean under duress, who had hit a marble floor in front of 40 people and stood back up, who had sat on a bedroom floor and chosen to stay, who had stood in a room of 200 people and told them what their silence had cost, kept writing. Not because she had solved anything, not because the county had been redeemed, or the machinery had been permanently dismantled, or the world had been fundamentally altered in its habits of judgment, but because there were women still, writing letters in careful handwriting. And someone had to read them, and Maris had learned at great expense, over a very long year, in a house that was finally and completely hers, that the most powerful thing you could offer another person was not rescue. It was the simple, radical, quietly revolutionary act of believing them before the room had made up its mind. She turned the page. She kept writing. The end.